Thanks so much, Irene, and thank you so much to GNI and to First Draft and to Pointer for the chance to be here. It was great to be in Singapore last year, and anyway, I hope we're all faring well in our own living rooms and lounge rooms and offices today. So I'm going to be talking about some practical tips for resiliency, and thanks, Elizabeth, for even for your presentation, but also introducing that word, resiliency. I want to start off talking about, well, why should media professionals even talk about this issue of trauma? And one of the reasons at the Dart Centre we really think it's important to talk about psychological trauma, one is to stay resilient as media professionals, so you can learn about strategies to look after yourself and to look after your colleagues. But we also believe it's about the journalism craft, that if you have an understanding about what psychological trauma can do to communities and to societies, then you can make better news choices. You can make better decisions about what you are looking at, what you are fact-checking, what you're reporting on. So it gives you a language and a framework to understand what you're actually seeing out there on the screen, or if you're working out in the field. We often say that we wouldn't, if a journalist from Mongolia came to Australia to watch and was sent out to watch and report on an Australian rules football match in their first week, they wouldn't have a clue what they were looking at. So why is it that we consistently get media professionals to look at and report on traumatic events without really knowing what they're looking at, what are the interactions, what are the machinations of psychological trauma? And for news organisations or media organisations to know about trauma is really just good business, because it means that you can look after your staff in a better way, in a more wholesome way, and that means that your staff will work better for you, they will be healthier and have more resilience to last the journey, to report on these really tough stories. Most media professionals we know are really resilient human beings, that even in talking about trauma, I don't want to get across the fact that if you are covering traumatic stories or looking at graphic content or horrible stuff, that it will impair you. Most of us are very, very resilient and will come back to our equilibrium very quickly. But for some of us, it may impact us. And so we need to know what we're looking at in terms of our own reactions, and indeed those of our colleagues. What is trauma? So what do we actually mean by trauma when I mention that word? Well, it can be induced by looking at graphic content or text, indeed, that is around violence. So it might be that you're covering something like an armed robbery, but it also war, terrorism, natural disaster, where you're seeing deceased persons, you're seeing a lot of carnage. So visually seeing those sorts of things. Now, where you feel under threat in some way that's very disturbing. So what it means is that you can actually see these things yourself. You can be involved in these things. You might be out and experience a tsunami or a flood yourself, but you can also witness it as happening to others. So you can be there reporting on it and seeing it in first person. But what's really interesting for media professionals is that we can also be hearing graphic details. So you might be interviewing someone, or you might be reading or checking something on a screen where you're reading graphic details of any of these events that we've got above there. And it means that you could be affected by this, even if you're not out in the field, even if you're seeing this or reading this on this explicit material, this graphic material on a screen. It can be injurious to us. It can damage us psychologically. So I've been talking about the visual and the graphic, but what we also know is that there is a moral distress these days, and there's some research that's been done on media professionals in terms of this moral distress or moral injury. Now, it is important as human beings that we have moral dilemmas and grapple with moral conundrums. So I don't, again, want to say that if we are in a moral dilemma that that's going to cause injury to us. But if something that we read about, we watch, we report on, we're checking, we're bearing witness to something that really fundamentally transgresses deeply held moral beliefs that we have, and that can cause harm to us. So an example of that might be that you're sitting and reading and checking graphic material about child sexual abuse, and of course, all of us have some abhorrence to that really transgresses our fundamental moral code. And so that may, for some people, cause a significant distress for us and a significant injury. So on one hand, we have the graphic detail, the graphic images, but also these moral issues that are potentially problematic for us. So I do have a question for you now. I've got a poll question, and I'm trying to. What, if you could put into the poll, what is the most stressful thing in your work in regard to graphic content, or is the stressful thing about your workload, uncertainty about what your job prospects might be around COVID and after COVID? Is it about graphic visual content that you see, or is it this moral distress that I've been talking about? So if we could have a bit of a poll around those, it'd be really interesting to see what your stresses are in your workplace and your situation. And we'll give you 30 seconds to look at those, to answer those, and come back to it in a moment. As I've been saying, it doesn't necessarily cause problems for us if we are exposed to this stuff. But what the research does tell us, that the accumulation of this work can cause injury, can cause problems for some of us some of the time. Most of us come back to our equilibrium, but if we constantly have this accumulation, as I've got there, if you gaze into the abyss gazes back at you, that we can get some sort of an impact by this. So a little bit of research that I did not so long ago on 101 fact checkers, to look at what these people experienced in terms of their stresses. The majority of the fact checkers that I surveyed were impacted by the moral issue that I raised before. So I thought that was very interesting, that it wasn't so much, yes, it was the graphic, and that is there in terms of the 36% of the people I surveyed, but these were the things that were the major issues for us. The uncertainty about what's going to happen following COVID, 41%, the graphic images, the visual images, the increased workload, and then the text, the graphic things that the fact checkers were reading in text contact. So they were the major stresses that were coming up for folks there. So what are some of the things that we need to look out for ourselves if we are impacted? So it might be that you start having traumatic nightmares. You might be having nightmares about the sorts of things that you're covering, that you're reading, that you're looking at. You might have an ongoing sense of distress. You might become a little bit more jumpy. So this is helping us become what we call trauma literate, starting to read your own signs and your own reactions, or indeed those of your colleagues as well, because you might be fine, but it's your colleagues that you might find have the impact. So I want to start moving in. I've talked a lot about the bad stuff, if you like, now, giving us some sort of ideas of what we're looking at and how we can become trauma literate. But I want to ask you now, what are the things that you use to maintain your resilience? How do you stay well during these sorts of stories and these sorts of things that you're checking and that you're covering? So now I want to talk about some of the strategies. And so you've got, if you could poll and answer some of those, we'll come back to that as well. So practical steps now that we can do. So again, looking at the research that I did on the fact checkers, the majority of the fact checkers used physical exercise. And this is a physiological thing that's really, really important, because when we get distressed, when we experience trauma, when we are very stressed ourselves, it's a physical reaction. We have these things in our bodies. It builds up stress chemicals, and the best way to get rid of those stress chemicals is by doing physical exercise. Also, humor was another one the fact checkers were using. And we know, again, that's a physiological thing. When we laugh, it creates endorphins, and it really helps to dissipate those stress chemicals in the body. This is an interesting one, that the majority, that 42% of the fact checkers had strong resilience because they believe in the mission of what they're doing, the importance of what they're doing. And that's something that the resilience research tells us, that if we have a strong sense of purpose of what we're doing and why we're doing it, that can actually enhance our resilience. So I would challenge people or encourage people to write out your own personal mission statement and get clear about why you're doing the work that you're doing. And of course, talking to friends and family is really important, but especially people who are not doing the sorts of work that you're doing. So be prepared. Another strategy is to do a self-check-in with yourself every day, and this can enhance our resilience. So just when you get up in the morning, just ask yourself, how are you feeling? Am I feeling unwell, or am I feeling a bit more vulnerable than usual? Am I having a conflict with my partner? Is one of my kids a bit sick? And if you answer yes, 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 and to each of those questions, and you've still got to go to work, what it means is it gives you an indicator that you need to up your self-care for the day, that if you're not feeling so well, you need to then put in a bit of a plan as to how you're going to look after yourself once you've finished doing this work during the day. So, okay, I'm not feeling so well. So in the afternoon, when I finished work, I'm going to go and have a hot bath and listen to some relaxing music. So you really need to make sure that you input your own self-care strategies. Another way to enhance your resilience is to eliminate, when you're sitting at the screen and you're doing work online, is to cut down the need for repeat exposure, because we know the best way to deal with graphic exposure is to limit the amount of it. And of course, we need to look at it for our jobs, but if you can implement some of these strategies here, where you're organizing your digital files, you're taking note of distinctive features, so you don't have to necessarily keep going back. So you don't have to keep looking at the same stuff over and over and over again. And really, I will say this time and time again, take breaks. It's really, really important to take breaks, and to not, our brains can't cope with looking at graphic, horrible stuff all the time. We're just as human beings not made that way. So please limit your exposure as much as you can while still doing the job. Create, as we've been doing, social distancing, 1.5 metres in Australia to keep away from each other. Try and do that to the content that you're looking at as well. So create that psychological distance. Maybe use a mat in front of your screen to lower the colour intensity. Put something nice to the side of your screen, a bowl of flowers, something where you can just move your gaze and take a nano break from the horrible graphic stuff that you're looking at on screen. And so also try and avoid using loop functions. If you need to look at visual content and you need to keep going over and looking at video content, but try to manually, if you can, limit that so you can calibrate your exposure to it. And again, I'll keep saying, please take breaks and use what I call nano breaks. Look at those cat videos now and then. Just move away, move your gaze, and look at funny stuff. So to get out of your chair and move. So please just make a constant commitment to yourself that you will get up every 5 to 10 minutes and move, take a break, take a breather, do the 3, 5, 8 breathing. If anyone's learnt to do broadcast breathing, you take in a deep breath for the count of 3, hold the breath for the count of 5, and exhale for the count of 8 completely. And we also have on the Dart Centre website there, we have chair yoga. So please get onto the chair yoga and do that there. So becoming morally resilient, how can you become morally resilient? So write out your code of ethics, your own personal code of ethics. Get clear about what your mission and purpose is, as I said. Ask yourself, who am I being in this particular moment, and who do I want to be as a human being? And also focus on gratitude and things that are good around you, because of course in this time of COVID we've got a lot of horrible stuff going on in our world. So try and focus on, we've got a thing going here, and I think it's international, the kindness pandemic, keeping kindness going on in the world and making sure you focus on those sorts of things to recalibrate and think of the goodness that's going on in your life. Create a case plan. There's no use coming to a workshop like this and not doing the self-care strategies. So really create a self-care strategy for yourself, write out a plan and work out, when are you going to take breaks? When are you going to do those fun things? And really write that out. If we can flatten the curve of our own stress, as we are flattening the curve of COVID, that's a really important thing. So a way to do that is to have things written down, have a plan, and work out what sort of activities will you do. So I'd like you to make a commitment after this workshop to do one new thing for you that can be a self-care strategy that you've never done before. So challenge yourself, whether it be, if you don't like running, maybe start taking up a little bit of running, even just 5 minutes. Do a run up to the letterbox and back. Or writing a bit of a journal. Some of those sorts of things would be really important. And then finally, I want to just focus on, before I finish up for the Q&A, if you are a newsroom or an organisational leader, what we know is that you really need to support your staff, that people can be exposed to a lot of graphic content. People can do, journalists and media professionals have ongoing resilience if they are really supported. And the research shows us that if organisations support their staff, if they check in and ask how they're going and create strategies and boundaries around that staff can really cope with a lot of bad stuff. Okay, so it's very, very important to look after your staff and put strategies in place to do that. And ways that you can do that as organisational leaders is to become a trauma-informed leader. So learn more about this. This is like a speed dating about trauma, but learn more about it. Be proactive, reach out to your staff, check in with them, ask how they're going. Create policies and processes around trauma, around digital safety. No doubt a lot of organisations have already done that, but also do it about the exposure of what your staff are seeing. Build in rotation and rest periods. It's really, really important to allow people, our brains, as human beings, we cannot sit in front of computers and screens and be exposed to graphic content over and over again. As human beings, we are not created that way. So we must, as leaders, you must have processes in and rest and recovery periods, and then encourage peer support. We know that a lot of countries, a lot of people don't access counselling and don't have the resources to do that. So one of the best ways is to allow staff to support each other and create that sort of environment for staff to check in with each other. So as a newsroom leader or as an organisational leader, please encourage that with your staff. And then finally, please go to the Dart Centre website. We have a lot of resources there that you can check in and learn more about this and become more trauma literate. So sorry for my clumsiness in terms of the digital slides here, but thank you for the presentation. Now we'll check in for the Q&A.